Greetings, this is Artie from Artifact Electronics. This is part 2 of the Oscar Synthesizer, the one I built myself. In the last episode we discussed why a few years ago I discovered the existence of this synthesizer, but I couldn't get one because it was either too expensive or it's become non-obtainium, but I really wanted one, and where there's a will, there's a way, maybe. But before doing anything, I checked. I found some materials on the internet. I created a bill of materials of all the parts that I would need, and to my delight, I found out that it is built entirely out of standard parts. Now, standard parts, this was built in the early 80s. They were standard parts in the early 80s. That doesn't mean that they're any longer standard parts, but you can find pretty much anything on eBay if it's available, and most of the parts I had, the electronics that is, some of the others I bought, and I constructed this thing. Now we had a look at it. It turns on, blinks some lights, but the one thing that we haven't done is to actually hear it, and we shall do that now. But first, let me caution you, I have never been in the same room as a real Oscar. I mean, nobody I know, or I've never seen one in real life. Seen lots of pictures, showed you some in the last episode, but I haven't seen one and I haven't heard one. So I built this thing, well, I built it blind. I mean, I did get the firmware for it, so the assumption is that if you have the hardware put together right, it should sound right, but there's a lot of analog circuitry in here, and since the thing was prototyped using wire wrap methods, wire wrapping is really good for digital circuits. It doesn't really bug them, because even if you have some noise introduced, there's usually enough headroom in the signals for a little noise not to bother the digital electronics. But the analog electronics don't like to have a whole bunch of wires on top of each other, injecting noise into each other. So the output's probably what I know already is going to be somewhat more dirty than the original. And then again, maybe not. Maybe the original did sound as dirty and lo-fi as this one will. But anyway, enough talk. Let's hear it. So before we start the demo, I thought we should have some fun. It's actually New Year's Eve as I'm filming this. And what I thought I'd do is we'll play Name That Tune. And I'll play a few, well, name that riff actually, because I'm not playing the whole thing. And so I'm going to play something. And you identify what it is, the band and the song, and the first person to leave me a comment with the correct answers for everything wins the contest. What is the prize? The prize is honorable mention in one of the future videos. And the only rules are you cannot use machine intelligence or machine brute force to identify what this is, because that's obviously unfair. You can ask your friends, family, the family pet, whatever, but basically can't use a computer to identify what it is I'm playing. So here's number 1. So this one's actually a bit of a gimme, because a while ago somebody actually asked in the comments what this tune was. And no, it is not the title music to the Artifact Electronics channel, but it was originally done by somebody else. So either you identify it or you start reading every single comment from today going back 2 years or something, and you can identify this. So put your thinking caps on and answer what number 1 was. Number 2. No hints on this one, but it's old. And here's number 3. Number 4. This one still gets played on the radio nowadays. And here's number 5. Now, this one's kind of difficult to play, so bear with me. But shouldn't be that hard to identify. I'll give you a hint. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. One thing I forgot to explain that would explain the simplicity of the tunes I'm playing is this is a monophonic instrument. What that means is you can only play one key at a time. I mean, you can play as many as you want, but only the highest key will sound. So actually, it's the last key you played, not the highest key. But there you have it. Get out your pencils and send me a comment with what those snippets were that I played. Well, I had the scope running, but normally when you play several waveforms superimposed upon each other, the scope, well, it looks kind of cool, but it doesn't really give you much information. So let's have a look at the base waveforms of this and see how clean or dirty they are. I don't think you could use this as a function generator. But anyway, the triangle first. That's pretty ugly. Okay, the problem here is the filter's messing with it. Okay. So it's noisy. I can hear it here. I mean, we had the resonance up, which plays havoc with it, and then of course actually brought the filter, lowered the center frequency on it. And so what you want to do is open the filter and shut the resonance off completely, and that's what we get. It looks like a triangle, but it's dancing and it's noisy. Next we have the saw. Same thing again. The filter is currently in low pass mode, so as I turn it down, it filters out the sound entirely. Same thing when I turn up the resonance. So it's identifiable as a saw, but not super clean. Next we have a square wave. Not very straight on top of the pulses, but in musical instruments you actually don't want the waveforms to be too perfect, because then they sound boring. The more dirt you have in them, the better it sounds. Then we're in the square wave again, but we can change the pulse width. And finally, we can apply automatic pulse width modulation to it. That changes the duty cycle. Let's see. So the waveforms aren't the cleanest in the world, but that's what gives the sound some grit and makes it more interesting. So there are three different filter types here. We heard the low pass before, but we all know what a low pass filter does, so let's select square wave and play a note. Let's make sure that the note is held. So now, as we turn the center frequency of it's not too happy. But anyway, as we turn the center frequency down, it starts cutting out high harmonics. And what we should be seeing is we're getting close to a sine wave. And continue turning down the center frequency, the whole sound disappears. The second type of filter we have available is a high pass. And the high pass behaves exactly the opposite way as compared to the low pass. So I'm going to turn the center frequency all the way up, and we hear nothing. And as I bring down the center frequency, we see the filter starting to pass the signal. And finally, we have a band pass. And so with the band pass, our center frequency has to be near the frequency that we played on the keyboard. So I'm turning up the volume, nothing. And then I turn up the center frequency, and eventually we get into the neighborhood of the key that was pressed on the keyboard. And it lets some of it through. Not a whole lot. turning up the resonance a bit. Makes the band a little bit stronger, but there's filter theory 101. It does work. There are many other features to this, but it's going to take hours. So I'll just point out a few more things, and then we can finish. So the other thing is it has a built-in arpeggiator, and what that means is you can hold a bunch of keys on the keyboard and it will play them in order from lowest to highest and then highest to lowest. The lazy man's way of playing something. So and it'll hold them. This is actually a really good way to test when you're creating a new sound, to just have it play, and you can and that's the arpeggiator. And there's also a step sequencer where you can record your own melodies in. It's very rudimentary, but again, for an instrument of its age, it was a big deal to include that. And of course, keep in mind, all it really cost was many hours of software programming and some extra memory space. There really isn't any. The arpeggiator and the sequencer didn't require any extra hardware. So we hold the sequence button and tell it to play back sequence number 1. We can of course change the tempo on it, change the octave, make it play a little higher and faster. There you go. And finally, this has full MIDI capability. I mean, it can communicate with other things. It's got that black cable over there coming out, which is feeding into this. I picked up this Casio keyboard when it was still safe to go to thrift shops. And why did I pick it up? Because this is a learning keyboard that lights up the keys. It teaches you how to play. Not the best way to learn how to play piano, but I found that it's actually a great MIDI visualizer. So what we can do is go back here and turn it into arpeggiator mode. So it's just playing a bunch of notes. The problem is when you take your hands off, you don't know what notes are playing. So now we go over and we look at the Casio, and it's lighting up the keys that the Oscar is playing. I mean, it is actually playing the Casio if I turn up the volume. Which just goes to prove that the MIDI standard was actually rather well thought out, considering that these two synths were probably close to 20 years apart, and they speak each other's language just perfectly. Well, thanks for watching, and I hope this encourages you to build stuff. Building stuff is very rewarding. I mean, it can also offer a lot of frustration when things don't work, but oh, when it comes to life, it makes it all worth it. So build something, anything. Don't watch TV. Anyway, thumbs up would be appreciated. Make sure to leave me your comments identifying the 5 riffs we played. And make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I'll cook up something different for the next video. Take care.